Good morning, everyone. I'm John Kelta-Jerome, and I want to welcome everyone to our inaugural spring event on accelerating sustainability. This event is being hosted by the Business Leadership Hub, which I have the honor of being the founding director, and it's also being hosted by our newly formed student group, Students for Leadership and Sustainability. And for the students in the audience, if you have any interest in knowing more about that student group, feel free to contact us. For those of you who may not be familiar with the Business Leadership Group, we have 7 centers and 2 student groups. The centers are the Baumhart Center, which is involved with ethics, social responsibility, social enterprise, Executive and Professional Education Center, Family Business Center, Loyola Limited, which is student-run businesses, the Supply and Value Chain Center, which is now the Supply Chain and Sustainability Center, the Center for Innovation, and the Center for Risk Management. I want to thank our keynote speaker and her mentee, the moderators, panelists, all the hub staff that have worked behind the scenes to make this happen, as well as today, the interns, as well as you, the audience, for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us this morning. I have the privilege, as I said, of overseeing the Business Leadership Hub that is interdisciplinary. We work across the schools of Loyola University, and we also work with many universities in the Jesuit network. When we host these events, we have a saying. That saying is, we're hopeful that you leave here with some golden nuggets, with some solutions that you can take back to the workforce. This event is appropriate as we focus on topics like women in business. In fact, anybody who saw the president address Congress, you saw for the first time in history 2 women sitting behind him. We want to also look at how sustainability impacts business and individuals, food waste, food insecurity, food deserts, and food hunger. And I'm sad to know that every 10 seconds, there's a child who dies from food hunger. I need to mention that besides sustainability, we want to make a difference in ethics, inclusion, diversity, and equity. That's the Jesuit way. That's the Jesuit strategy. I had the privilege of being on a panel this past Wednesday that was hosted by the Black Alumni Board. They had 3 excellent speakers, and these people talked about what they went through because of the color of their skin. Growing up in Detroit or growing up in Mississippi and the hardships they went through and how they now achieve things. They all happen to be Loyola graduates and are very successful men and women. So their story and others like them show you can be successful no matter the color of your skin, religion, gender, or anything else. I encourage everybody to lead by example as the speakers in this event have done and continue to do. If anyone is interested in learning more and want to make a difference in people's lives, please contact me to talk about what we can do together. I have a quote from Walt Disney, and that quote is, "All our dreams can come true if we have the courage to pursue them." So now I want to hand over the baton to Aranza Vilverde, who is an employee and a student, and will be having a fireside chat with our keynote speaker. And this has the makings of an advertisement, Aranza, that you're both a student and an employee. So Aranza, I turn this over to you.
Thank you, John. And good morning, everyone. I want to share with you a few logistical announcements today before we jump in. And so today we're using the app Crowd Compass event guide for our inaugural Accelerating Sustainability event for several great reasons. First, in the platform, you can find all of these sessions, speakers, attendees, sponsors, and even connect one-on-one with participants. Additionally, important updates can be sent via notifications through the app. So I encourage you to just check out the platform throughout the day, and we can Also, connect your social network accounts so that you can highlight any of the sessions and the learnings that you've been seeing today. So the main URL for this conference is the Crowd Compass platform. So our advice is to keep this window open for the duration of the conference to kind of help guide you throughout the program. Myself and the hub support staff in the background will be checking in on any questions that you have throughout the day. So feel free to use the Q&A feature. And for our sessions, we'll also be using the Zoom Q&A functions. So please feel free to share any questions that you have for our speakers. So with this, I would like to formally start the first session for today's Accelerating Sustainability event. You've been hearing from me for a little bit, so I'll introduce myself. I am a full-time staff member here at Loyola. My name is Aranza Valverde. I'm from El Paso, Texas, and Ciudad Juarez, Chihuahua, which is a border city in West Texas. I completed my undergraduate here in Loyola in operations management and international business, and am now pursuing my MS in supply chain in Loyola as well. So I'd like to welcome Francesca DeBiase to the stage. She is the EVP and Global Chief Supply Chain Officer at McDonald's. So hello, good morning.
Good morning, Aranza. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you. I know we've got your bio listed in our platform, but I wanted to see if you could share a little bit about yourself and your ties to Loyola.
Sure. So first of all, I'm a very proud Loyola grad. I graduated with a Bachelor of Business Administration with a focus in economics. So my background is finance. I'm also a member of the Board of Advisors for the Quinlan School of Business. So lots of ties, strong ties to the university. And now, as you said, I'm with McDonald's Corporation. I've been there a long time, started in the finance organization and spent a lot of time traveling with McDonald's. I lived in Europe for 11 years with the company, now with a global job. And with us being in 120 countries, I get to travel a lot. So maybe that'll come up during our conversation today. And, I have gone through several different roles with McDonald's, both in supply chain and sustainability, helped start our franchising business in Europe. So, worked in a lot of different parts of the business. And I finally just probably add that, I have really strong ties to Chicago too. I'm back in Chicago. I'm happy to be back. I sit on several boards that are part of the Chicago network. So I'm on the board of the Chicago Council of Global Affairs, the Metropolitan Planning Council for the City of Chicago, and the Chicago Network, which is a women's organization. So really, proud Loyola graduate and proud Chicagoan.
Awesome, thank you. I was going to start with a quick icebreaker and decided not to ask if you're a Sox or a Cubs fan, because I know that can divide the room. But I think since we're talking on the broad subject of sustainability, and we've also had just a previous conversation that you're an avid book reader, I feel like I have to ask if you have any book recommendations. What are you reading that is a source of inspiration, if you could share?
Oh, that's a great question. I read a lot. We did talk about that when we had our conversation. So lately I've been reading a lot of books on social justice. So I would say, Ibram Kendi, he is an amazing writer. He wrote How to Be Anti-Racist. He wrote Stamped from the Beginning. I thought both of those books were great. I read The Sum of Us by Heather McGhee recently, another book on social justice, which was great. And what I read probably most often regularly is a magazine. It's called The Week, which I learned about only a couple of years ago. And it's a weekly magazine that comes out. I have a subscription. And the reason that I really like it is it tells you the facts about what happened, and then it tells you both sides of the story. So it'll tell you, what the Wall Street Journal said about it, and what the New York Post said about it, and what the New York Times said about it. So you get, I think it's really hard nowadays to get some kind of a balanced view, so you can make your own decisions about what's happening in the world. And I really like The Week for that.
Interesting. I'm taking notes. I hadn't heard of The Week. I'll definitely check them out, because I think you're right. It's hard to kind of compile the same story from different sources. So that's really interesting.
Yeah, it's really great. It comes out of DC. Apparently, everyone there knows about it, but I didn't know about it either.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. I think I guess to jump in on this broad subject of sustainability, I feel like a lot that we hear in the news is how large corporations can take a really big leading effort to reduce climate change impact and like operate more sustainably, and how a lot of the responsibility falls on these large corporations. But I think we have a lot of different leaders in the audience as well, from businesses that are all kinds of different sizes. So I wanted to ask if we could start by talking about how can business leaders think of scale in their sustainable solutions, and like how aggressive should they be, how optimistic about the current kind of outlook on global climate change.
Oh, wow. Okay. There was a lot packed into that.
Yes.
So how aggressive or, not should they be? So, maybe I'll start off by saying I'm optimistic, because that was, I think, one of the final things you asked about, how optimistic should we be about where we're going with the climate? And that's an important question. I am optimistic. I think we all have a lot of reasons to be optimistic. If I think about, the last 4 years, even when we had a government in the United States that was not favorable around climate change, we as companies and cities and universities continue to do our part, right? So we're a member at McDonald's of an organization called We Are Still In. The city of Chicago is a member of We Are Still In. A lot of other organizations just kind of came together and said, even if the United States is not going to be following the Paris Accord, we all are, and we're going to keep doing that work. So, that gave me optimism even in that time when there wasn't really government support behind it. And now, we're in a new situation where we do have government support for climate, and and that's just fantastic. And I think that'll help propel us even more. And you do see this, around all countries, right? Everyone is focused on climate, and they are recognizing that this is the biggest environmental issue of our time. So I am optimistic about where we're going with climate. I also think companies are doing a lot. That was, I think, one of your other questions of, what are companies doing? And I think, at McDonald's, we've done a lot. I'm really proud of the work that we've done there. We started a global strategy around climate several years ago, actually, and it's called Scale for Good. So it was an opportunity for us to say, how do we use our size and scale beyond our own four walls, and really use the opportunity to change the world. And so we set strategies around that, which I think we'll probably touch on later, and worked with others outside of our organization to set those detailed strategies. And a lot of other companies have done the same thing. So I think what you're seeing, and why I'm optimistic, is you're seeing governments change, you're seeing companies change, and you're seeing consumer expectations change, especially the next generation. A lot of you that are probably on this WebEx today, have higher expectations of companies, and I think that's a good thing as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think leading into my next question, it might be hard to, because I think the impacts are seen like further into the future. So from these strategies that are started now. So can you talk about kind of what incentives there are that we can communicate now to drive these sustainable visions moving forward?
So what incentives we have, or organizations?
Yeah, I feel like sometimes they might be like monetary incentives are kind of the first thing that pop into my brain, but sometimes like R&D is necessary for reaching kind of sustainable solutions, or technology implementation, which I feel like can be upfront costly, but maybe, I don't know if like the incentive is might be different when thinking of
yeah. So I think thanks for that. So I think from a corporate perspective, the biggest incentive that we should all consider is our own business, that this is going to drive our business. It's just, there's expectations of consumers that should be driving the way we think about our own business. So I think it drives growth, sustainability. And I think if you embed it into your business, it does drive your business growth. So I know that there's a lot, as you said, a lot of times people will say, well, if I have to spend this money today and I'm not going to see a return on it in, 2 or 3 years, should I do it? And people who think of invest of costs instead of it as an investment, I think struggle with the concept. But sometimes I'll ask the question, well, if you don't invest that today, what's that going to do to your business? It's not just you invest it and you don't invest and nothing changes. You fall further and further behind, and that doesn't lead to brand trust, and brand trust leads to loyalty. Brand trust leads to higher sales. So I always talk about it. We have to invest for the future. We have to invest for our planet. We have to invest for our people. And there are ways you can look about sustainability is not always just a cost either. There are sustainable solutions that actually save the company money, especially if you think about sustainability from the time you start your business case. And that's tends to be sometimes a vicious circle where someone will say, okay, I want to develop a new product X, and they don't think about sustainability until the very end. And then somebody says, oh, you need to bring sustainability in. And then they think, oh, now I've got to change it and it's going to cost more. But if you think about sustainability from the beginning, when you're developing X, you can embed sustainability into your practices, and it actually can save money. I mean, there's so many examples of that. I think, just even at McDonald's, as we're thinking about our packaging, and we're looking at, the cup, the lid, and the straw, right? So if we think about how we're reducing the amount of plastics or trying to make that cup and lid and straw more sustainable, if you think about each of those individually, it's more difficult. But if you think about, hey, what would happen if we created a lid without a straw? Well, you save money by not having a straw, which you can invest into the lid. So a simple example, but I bring it up because I think so many times people don't think about the entire business case and have that discussion up front.
Yep. No, that's a great point. I think one of the reasons why I got into supply chain was because I read on the back of a Burt's Bees wrapper how much money they had saved from just changing to a more sustainable option for their wrappers. And I, like, in my brain, it just clicked of like, this is the end-to-end, like, entire kind of impact that a small change can have, and the cost savings, but also the additional, like, saving up on plastic. So I love that example. I think we've also talked about how individuals on a personal level can maybe build on sustainability within their organizations, even if their organization might not be necessarily addressing sustainability. And I believe that your title sustainability was built into your role. Is that a correct assumption?
Yeah. So I'll talk a little about me and then maybe what other individuals can do. Yeah. So, I think if you think about supply chain as a function in most companies, especially in companies that have to do with food and ag, the biggest sustainable solutions and the biggest impact on sustainability comes from your supply chain. So to me, it makes a lot of sense to have sustainability and supply chain solutions connected. Because you set goals and then you're accountable to meet those goals, and that's how it is at McDonald's. 2/3 of our environmental impact from our entire company comes through our supply chain. So being able to have the accountability for that allows us to make significant changes in that area. So I think there's a natural connection between those two roles. When you asked about individuals, what can individuals do? I think it varies based on where you are within your own organization. But I would say, even without not starting with the company lens, but starting with just what you can do as a person, I think the most important thing everyone can do is vote. And people might think that's a strange idea, but there's a lot we can do individually. So as you talked about, you can buy products which are more sustainable, and you should. Like you talked about Burt's Bees and how you were inspired by that. Even as students who, I know how that is when you don't have a lot of money around. You can change the light bulbs in your apartments and use LED lighting. There's a lot of individual things that you can all do, and especially supporting brands and educating yourself on that. However, the issue of environmental sustainability and climate change is really so big that we need government support and regulations to help drive real change. So, for example, none of us on our own can build a clean energy plant. We can't set up recycling communities for big cities. But governments can do that, and they do that. And they do that based on how their constituents vote. So I would just, implore you all to vote and educate yourself on, the candidates, and the candidates who closely resemble your points of view on climate and what's important to you. And as they hear about that, that's really, to me, what's going to make systemic change within cities and countries is, government regulations and government support for these really, really big issues. So voting is, for me, the most important thing you can do. Second would be, as you mentioned, it's really supporting brands that value the environment. So talking about your example, reading online, understanding what brands do. I think McDonald's is a good example of, we do a lot and we don't do a really good job talking about it. If you go to our website, you can read a lot about what we're doing, how we're developing sustainable commodities. So whether that's our coffee platform, beef, chicken, fish, what we're doing on the nutrition side for removing artificial ingredients, flavors, and colors. There's a lot of work going on and completed at McDonald's that you can read about on our website, and hopefully that inspires you to vote with your dollars at McDonald's. On the climate side, I think that one of the things I'm most proud of that we've done at McDonald's is we're the first restaurant company to set a science-based target to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions in line with the Paris Agreement. And we were the first restaurant company to do it, and that was almost 2 years ago now. And we continue to be the only restaurant company that set those targets that was approved by the Science-Based Target Initiative. So, really proud of that work. And as I said, do your part. If you can, think about changing out your light bulbs. Think about electric, using electric Uber cars, and just thinking about where you spend your dollars.
Yep, absolutely. I've got a good plug for Growth Collaborative. This is a really good company that sells. They are aiming to be like plastic free by the next 5 years. And they sell anything from soaps, detergents, things that usually come only in plastic containers. So they're trying to find creative solutions for that. And I really like that we're touching on the climate change topic, because I do have a question, since we've kind of talked a little bit about social justice issues. And I know in our previous conversation, we talked briefly about how climate change really does disproportionately affect populations. So I want to ask, how should we think of DE&I jobs, strategies that can be created by businesses to further kind of bridge it into like how we address climate change, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's a great question. We talked a little bit about, my point of view is right now we've kind of got 4 crises happening at the same time, right? We've got the health crises with COVID. We've got the social crisis with the social injustice that has become more apparent recently, but has always been there, as we know. We've got the environmental crisis with climate change, and we have a financial crisis too. A lot of people are really hurting, and we expect a lot of people to come out of the even when COVID's over, to come out economically much worse off than they were before. And all of these crises affect diverse people much more than anyone else. And they're all interconnected as well. So if you think about COVID, how did that happen? It happened because we had a zoonotic disease that came into humans. And the reason that happened is because, animals have less space to be in forests, right? And so they come in more contact with humans, and then the disease spreads. So all of these things, I guess I should start by saying, is they're all interconnected. Mm-hmm. And then if you think about the impact on people of color or diverse populations, the impact from climate, it does impact those people much more significantly, because we have the wealthiest countries in the world that make up the biggest impacts on greenhouse gas emissions and on climate, and the biggest impacts coming weather related in countries that don't have those impacts. So if you think about hurricanes and storms and all of those things that tend to happen, you've seen that in the Philippines, you see that in all over Africa and Asia, impacting poorer countries that is coming from richer countries. So it really has a lot to do with diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I think that people are starting to think about that more. People are starting to have that more be part of their strategies. And certainly, if you look at social injustice, now every company is talking about how they can lead in diversity and including diversity officers in their organization and so forth. And I think that's really important. And so, a few of the things that we've done at McDonald's related to diversity, equity, and inclusion, I think the first thing you need to do is you need to set some targets and show actions and results. So, we talked the other day about, it's just not enough for, if you're talking about gender diversity, to say, well, we're going to celebrate Women's Day, International Women's Day, and, aren't we a great diverse company?
Yep.
And we're finished there. No, you need to set some KPIs within your organization around representation of women, of people of color. You need to understand not only representation when people come into your organization, but how are they rising? Are they being promoted at the right levels? How are they feeling? Do they feel like they belong in the organization, that this is a company that works for them? And how they're rewarded, right? So equal pay. So you have to set targets for all of those things. I believe those targets should be made public, because I think that holds you as an organization more accountable for meeting those targets. And then you have to take action to meet those targets. So at McDonald's, we have set targets. We've set targets for people of color within our organization. We've set targets for gender parity within our organization, within our supply chain. We've already actually met those 2030 targets. We have a gender balanced supply chain organization at McDonald's globally, all the way up through the officer level. We've got 50-50 throughout the organization, which I'm very proud of. We've also met our people of color goal, which is to have 30% of our organization be people of color. So, setting those goals, and then also at the highest level. So what we've done there is, as a member of the senior leadership team with the CEO and the top 14 people in the company, our bonus is tied to our diversity goals. So that, just ensures that it's a focus for us, and it's as important as the financial results of the organization. So I think, it's really important to get those things right. And then we also have things like, there's networks within the organization too, which I think is important. We have a global women's leadership network. We have a McDonald's African American community network. We have an Asian network. We have an LGBTQ network. We have a working parents network. We've got networks for everybody. And I think, those are great too, because they help, people feel like they belong.
Yes. And I love that since you have a global network, there's so much reach in that. And like so many opportunities to build kind of community within your organization. That's really cool. I think that I did want to touch on kind of women in business, and I think that this kind of segues really well into the next kind of section, but I wanted to ask, how can we continue building spaces for women to rise through the workplace? 'Cause I feel like I hear from high executive women that the higher up that you move, the less women that you see, and even more so the less women of color that you see. So do you have any tips or any kind of considerations we should take when considering women?
Yeah, you're right. So that, when I remember my first meeting with the supplier community, when I was in Europe, I sat down, I had my first meeting with the top 10 suppliers in Europe. And I was meeting them all for the first time. I had just moved into the role in Germany, and I was the only woman in the room. And I was like, wow, this is the start of something which I'm going to have to figure out how to change. And so you're right. We need to get more women in senior leadership roles. We need to get more women in board positions. At McDonald's now, we've got of our top leaders, 5 of us are women. So we're in a pretty good number at this point in our organization, which is great. But I think the first thing we can all do as women is mentor other women. So I do a lot of mentoring. I think it's really important, not only mentoring, but advocating for other women, making sure that we're pulling up those women and supporting them, and especially women of color, as you said, even more important because you see less women of color than white women in organizations. So I think mentoring women, taking our time to spend with women is really important as women, but it's also important as men. Men, need to mentor women because they'll support them and help them. And some of my best mentors were men, so it's important, I think, for both of us. I think an important thing that I always talk with women about is we need to do a better job of speaking up and creating what we're calling a speak up culture at McDonald's. Especially if you're the only one in the room, it's hard to speak up, especially if you're new in that room. You think, oh, I can just sit here and what's my role, and let me hear what everyone else has to say first, and then maybe I'll say something. And I think women tend to do that more than men do. And so really the advice I give is like, what would your best friend do? Or what would your best friend tell you? They'd be like, you go in, you get in there and you tell them what you know, and you're really smart. And, so you gotta, like, I always say, think about what your best friend would tell you to do, and, have the courage to go in there and, and provide your point of view, because people are looking for your point of view. So go in there and do that. And if you are the only woman in that room, you might want to go to the leader in that room in a quiet moment and ask why. Sometimes people don't talk about those things, but it's obvious. You look around a room, people recognize, this is a man, this is a man, this is a woman, this is a person of color, or there's no persons of color in this room. Ask those questions. Why do we have this room the way we do? Because I think, at this point, people recognize the business case for diversity. It was one of the first things we did in the Global Women's Leadership Network was we said, do people recognize why diversity is important? And you think it's so basic, like, of course they should, but we still went through the process of doing a business case to say, this is why diversity matters. If at McDonald's, if you think of our customer base, we pretty much have 50-50 men and women coming to visit our restaurants and our customers. So, don't you think if we have more women in leadership, we'll be able to understand our customers better? Don't you recognize that women are bigger spenders in the household when it comes to income? Moms come with their kids to McDonald's. there's just, more, companies with the highest level of diversity at the board and senior level leadership have better business results. There's so many statistics that, you can go on and on to share, but finding that business case for your own organization is probably an important first step, just so that everyone's talking about it the same way. Because then once you realize, like, hey, there's benefits here, it's easier for you to say, well, if there's benefits, then why aren't we showing up like that in the most senior level of the organization? And how can you be, really a positive trajectory for change?
Mhm.
And one other thing that I also do in meetings is sometimes women tend to get talked over in meetings. And so if I see that happen to another woman in the meeting, especially now I've been in my role for a longer time and maybe have a stronger seat at the table, I will say, did you just heard, what Mary just said? I want to just, make sure we all heard that point. Mary, did you mean this? Or, I'll bring it back to that. And so there's ways that we can all support each other in the room.
I love that. I love how you talk about encouraging speak up culture and talking of like as if your best friend was kind of pumping you up in the background, because I think we might tend to suffer from imposter syndrome a little bit. But I really like that advice and how we can just kind of support each other, because yeah, I think I'm from my personal experience when I first started some of my MS classes that are supply chain specific, they are more male oriented careers. So sometimes I'd be like one of two women in the room. But I think now that I'm almost I'm finishing up with my degree, I am seeing more women, and we kind of like give each other the look of like we know that we're in this together. So there's a little bit of community being built as more women enter kind of more male dominated roles.
Yeah, and it happens at every level too. I mean, some people are surprised to hear me say that. I remember when I joined, I've been at McDonald's for a long time, and when I joined that table at the senior leadership table, so with the CEO and the top executives, even at that level, as a senior executive in the company, my first senior leadership team meeting, I had the same experience. I thought, gosh, do I belong here? And I've never been in this room, and I should, just listen to what, people say, and, won't say too much because I'm new, I don't know. And, afterwards, it was the CEO at the time who said to me, Francesca, I want to hear your voice. If I didn't want to hear your voice, I wouldn't have put you in this room. And so again, that mentorship and that speak up culture, and, you realize, you're not alone out there. And it's not just for women. I think men have that too, first time in a big room. Maybe they don't say it all the time, but I think I've heard men talk about the same issue, and just know that it does happen even at senior levels. And you just got to go in there and be like, okay, what would my best friend tell me now?
Yeah. I love that. Thank you for sharing that. I think continuing the like women in business, or I think right now being out of business, kind of talking of the she session, and all of like our current situations of just working from home and working remote, or having to drop out of the workforce. What are we, I guess I want to ask, like, what are we learning about our how flexible we need to be with employees, with working conditions, because it's affecting women's participation in.
Yeah, it certainly has. I mean, if you've all seen the latest Lean In survey results, it showed that women are leaving the workforce at a much higher level than men are during COVID. And you can see why. I mean, this homeschooling thing, I'm fortunate. My daughter's a senior in high school. I've got a lot of people on my team who have young kids, and I have no idea how they managed during this time. It was so difficult for everyone, even with the flexibility that we gave. It just, I think it put a lot of stress on everyone, especially women. And most of that work went to women. So yeah, I think what we've learned is that this works pretty well, right? I mean, I don't think anyone would have expected we'd be able to work from home and be on Zoom calls all the time. It's not fantastic, but it does work and people can be very effective. So I think most organizations, as they're looking at what does the workforce look like in the future, they're saying, we need to have more flexibility. And certainly, we're saying the same thing. We're not going to be expecting people to come into the office every day. We'll have more opportunities, more flexibility on working from home. Having said that, I still do think it's important to have FaceTime, to have those meetings, to see people. So I don't expect that it's going to be, people are working from home all week or all month, but I do expect there to be more flexibility. And one of the things, we're looking at McDonald's, this week we've set up vaccines for our employees at the office. So for our employees and their families and the crew people that work in the restaurants in the Chicago area and their families. So knowing, that they have that access, and a lot of people felt more comfortable, actually, especially people of color, coming and getting those vaccines in our office versus getting them somewhere else. So we feel like, over the next month, everyone who has the opportunity, who wants to be vaccinated, will be. And so then people thought, well, maybe we can reopen the office, June 1st, wouldn't that be great? Bring everybody back. And we did pause and say, well, hey, wait a minute, that's going to be the time when moms are going to have their kids and parents in general are going to have their kids for the summer. And so, are we giving them enough time to think about childcare and how does this all work? And, so what we've said is, we'll maybe slowly start allowing people to come back, but we won't have kind of a full back to normal, we're back in the office until the fall when kids go back to school. So I do think that all companies are going to have to be more flexible in how they think about work and how they think about working parents.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. Yeah, I think a lot of us have realized the benefits of working remote, but also kind of like you said, we do miss the social interactions. Like I haven't seen my coworkers since last year, but that'll be an interesting kind of balance to strike.
Yeah, and you're right. There's a balance, and we've got some employees who can't wait to get back, right? So that this affects people's mental health differently. We have some employees who are like, I want to come back every day, and I want to start that now. And then you have some, every employees are in different positions. Some have, they live with elderly parents, or they have health issues. So I think you have to meet people where they are and allow for that flexibility on both ends.
Yeah, absolutely. I think going into kind of our next kind of section before we jump into Q&As, I do want to make sure that we ask you some questions that are, I think, more for students specifically. So I know there's a lot of like representatives from different industries here, but we also have a lot of students in our audience. And I wanted to ask if you have some advice for those interested in pursuing a career path aligned with sustainability.
Yes, that's a great one. The first thing I'd say is, it's fantastic to have that passion around sustainability, and we really look for people who have that passion. I think what makes somebody even more successful is when they can marry that passion with a deeper business case or financial background. So I would suggest, if you want to get a degree in sustainability, make sure you take classes in finance too. Because if you want to work for a company and you want to lead change, you have to be able to say, hey, this is where we want to go, but also realistically, here's the business case for how we're going to get there. And I think, that has helped me a lot. As I mentioned, my background is in economics. So having that background and then having a passion around sustainability has helped me to influence and drive that through the business. So that would be the first thing, is that's the way you can influence to make change, is having that combination. I think there's also a lot of programs you can explore to support your career. So We get a lot of our interns from the EDF Climate Corps. It's a really structured internship program, which is fantastic. So I suggest you look up the EDF Climate Corps website if you're interested in internships there. There's also an organization called Net Impact. And Net Impact is a really strong channel for students to consider for ideas and job postings. So I don't know if Loyola has a chapter on Net Impact, but if not, I would suggest you get involved. I know there is a local Chicago chapter for Net Impact, and they have a jobs board there. And then I think, another thing that I heard from my colleagues is, you don't have to have a job title that has sustainability in the title. You can embed sustainability into whatever job you have, even if you're just, if you're in any other organization. Supply chain is a great example, right? You can be the buyer, let's say, for potatoes, but then you can start to think about, okay, well, how can we reduce water usage then? How can I help my suppliers have a more sustainable potato production? Even if it, again, maybe wasn't in your direct title, but there are ways to do it. So think about, how you can use the power of your role. And I think you can do that in any role to bring sustainability initiatives forward. And then, as you look at companies, there's companies who, are probably more at the forefront of sustainability and doing a lot of great work. And a lot of people tend to maybe focus their efforts there. But there's a lot of companies that maybe haven't done a lot, but they're authentically wanting to start that journey. And that's also a great place to start, because you can get probably a lot done in those organizations by taking some early actions, as long as you feel that they're authentically trying to move forward. So those would be a few ideas for the students.
Yeah, I love that. I think I personally didn't consider how the mission alignment of my personal values and the company's values, how important that was, and going to work every day and making sure that my input is being heard, but also aligning with the overall mission. And even if it's not explicitly sustainability, that those opportunities exist. I think that's something I personally didn't think would be a very big deal when I graduated, but I've learned to understand that it is, and it's motivating to know when those align.
Yeah, and that's the most important thing, right? And you're right, is knowing that you're going into a culture that matches your culture. And I think, if I think about Loyola, just for myself, when I was a student, I didn't recognize how important it was, that the school had this strong ethical stance and moral character, and in the business school, right? So it was kind of like, okay, you take these classes and that's fine. But I can't tell you how many times that has come to benefit me when there's a business issue you have to solve, and there's a lot of different ways you can do it. And if you think back to the education and think back to what you got at Loyola, which was very strong for me, was, what's the right thing to do? How are you going to think about this ethically, and go forward on that path? That's really important. And you definitely should be asking those types of questions as you interview, to make sure that the companies that you're working for have that same, share your values.
I love that. Thank you. I have one last question before we move into some of our Q&A. I wanted to ask, as an LUC alum, can you share how your experience at Loyola has helped you in your career?
Yeah. So I think the biggest thing that I would say is what I, just to add on to maybe what I just said, was I learned the value of ethics in business. I think the biggest benefit of Loyola, and even in today's world, when I look at the course list and the expectations of a business graduate at Loyola, that marrying of ethics and business is stronger than in any other university that I see. And I think that hiring somebody from Loyola now, that's what you're hiring. You're hiring a person with strong ethics, with strong moral character, somebody who cares about diversity, cares about issues that that are important to humanity. And so, when I was taking those, again, when I took the classes, I thought, okay, these are great classes, but you kind of see them in a silo from business until you get into the business world and realize, oh, this is really important. So to me, that was a great thing. I also loved, I loved the vibrancy of being in the city. I was, took my classes at Loyola Chicago, and I felt like the difference between that and maybe going to a school out in the middle of the cornfields, in those schools, you tend to maybe have a inflated view of who you are and your impact on the world, because the school is kind of the center of those towns, where in a city like Chicago, you realize, okay, I'm part of this much bigger metropolis, and I love the energy of the city. Loyola allowed me to get internships in the city, and just really enjoyed my time there.
Yes. Awesome. Thank you. I do remember I was at my supervisor's graduation, and you were the commencement speaker. And I remember how you talked about business and ethics, which is very inspirational. And I took a class recently on business ethics in sustainability, where our only assignment, that was our entire grade, was how do you connect the topic of this class to the global pandemic? And we had to do like a mind map of how like all these two topics connect, why they're interrelated, and that was our final presentation. So I think we each got to see how through our own experiences and our own perceptions and even network, we saw each other's just thought process of how you can connect both of these like very large, seemingly unrelated topics.
Yeah, and I mean, I can't imagine that assignment anywhere else, right? It's just that's fantastic to hear.
Yeah, no, it was really cool, and I think we've got some good Q&As. I wanted to pivot into this specific career and supply chain question that we have. So someone would like to know that currently they are taking a career break raising kids, but looking to return to a career in supply chain. If you have any advice.
Yeah. Well, I think, I don't know how long of a time the person's been out of the field. I think showcasing, what you've done in the past is really important. But I think also, being a mom is also, there's a lot you can talk about there, right? If you think about managing all of the different priorities and how you do that, managing your kids, managing the house, continuing to be curious and educate yourself. So, obviously this person has found the time to join this session, so they're staying current. I think that's probably the most important thing, is to show like how you continue to stay current, how you have curiosity about the field, and that you didn't just, completely walk away from it, but you're continuing to be part of the broader connection to supply chain. Will help you when you're ready to come back into the workforce.
Yeah, you're ready to jump back in.
Yeah, but I think that's more common these days. Don't worry about it. People have so many different paths, and I think it's not the same expectation that maybe it was 10 years ago, that you come from this to this to this. It's people have a lot of different paths, and that's what makes people interesting.
Yes. I love Michelle Obama's book, Becoming, and how she talks about that in her continuous evolution. I think it gave me a little bit of peace of like, all right, I don't have to segment everything in my life. It's just a process of evolution.
Right.
And I think another good question we've got here in the Q&A is more specifically, like what is a good way to start with a target? So like a KPI, I believe is what they're referring to make it a real target on what is attainable, speaking to carbon footprint reductions.
Yeah, that's a great question. So what we did, and what I think is really helpful, is work with some experts on this. So McDonald's partnered with the World Wildlife Fund, WWF, several years ago, and we literally opened our books and said, this is what we buy in 120 countries. This is where it all comes from. So help us determine where our biggest impacts are. And they did that. And we ended up selecting 5 commodities where we said, we can make a significant change that will be meaningful for the world. And it was meaningful to WWF. And then they helped us set targets too. So we looked at what other companies were targeting. We looked at our own impact and how we could impact not only McDonald's, but our suppliers and the suppliers beyond that. And they really were the ones that helped us to set those targets. And target setting is changing too, I think. When we originally set targets, most companies had 2020 targets because that was this nice, round number year. We set 2020 targets too. And a lot of those targets were, we will sell, 100% sustainable coffee. We'll sell 100% sustainable fish. These targets we'll be talking about soon, how well we met those targets. But now the targets that you're starting to see as people move beyond 2020 are a little bit more broad. So they're talking about how do we end deforestation? How do we think about water use? How do we unpick the climate? Specifically for the climate, if you're just talking about climate, the Science-Based Target Initiative, which I mentioned, we're the restaurant company that has set those targets. They have specific targets that you have to meet. So it's, using your greenhouse gas emission usage today, and then what reduction will you need to meet the Paris Accord is the way they calculate it. And it's very specific on how to get to that point. And so that is very helpful because, it shows you the path there specifically for climate change. But then as you start to look at the details, understand, well, how does my company affect climate change? I think getting support from outside organizations like, in my opinion, WWF has been an amazing partner to us.
Awesome, thank you. I think we've got time for our last question, and I think it's a good one to end on, but what are you most proud of at McDonald's in respect to sustainability?
Oh, what am I most proud of? I am most proud of setting our strategy back, probably 10 years ago. I think we started on this journey. We were doing a lot of different things at McDonald's, but we didn't really bring it all together. And when we did, we put it under a banner of Scale for Good. Like, how can we use our size and scale, not just for McDonald's, but beyond McDonald's and for the world? And so setting the strategy, working with WWF, setting those 2020 targets, it really helped galvanize this big company in 119 countries towards the same goals and using our scale in a different way. And then, hitting those targets and now thinking about what's next. But those early days were a lot of fun when we were just thinking, hey, this is amazing, and how can we change the world, and what can we do differently? That was fun, and I'm super proud that lasted the way it did, and we continued to focus on it for all those years.
Yeah, that's really cool. There's a history behind all of what we're seeing today, so that's very awesome.
Yeah.
So I think we are basically right at time. It's been so lovely to have this opportunity to talk with you and hear your thoughts, your words of wisdom, encouragement of your future optimism, but also how to continue raising women in business and being so encouraging. So thank you so much for your time, Francesca, and for joining us today.
Well, thank you, Aranza. I'm so looking forward. If people on the phone, if you don't know Aranza, get to know her. She's got an amazing story too that we had a chance to talk about. And for all of you out there, especially the students, you're the next generation. And I'm passing that torch to you to continue to have that passion and drive, and know that you can change the world. So look forward to seeing that. And thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks.
I think I will be transitioning to the next session. So we'll conclude our first discussion and now move on to the next exciting panel. We'll be talking about food waste. So a very pressing topic that's been even more elevated by the COVID pandemic in 2020. So I'd like to welcome Kim Peterson, Director of Environmental Sustainability Development at Morton Salt.
Thank you so much, Arantxa. Yes, I'm very excited to talk about this very important topic. And you know, when I first joined Morton Salt, I hadn't really considered what an impact food waste has on the climate. And so as I started, getting involved and researching more, it was really eye-opening. And so to kick off the session, I just wanted to frame it up for you, just in case you were like me and you didn't have a ton of experience on this. And the United Nations established a sustainable development goal to reduce food waste by 50% by 2030. So if you're not familiar with these sustainable development goals, you should check them out. They're really focused. And so there's certain goals that the UN lined out to combat climate change and to address the human side of sustainability. So just have a look at those. Additionally, there's a group called Project Drawdown, and they're a nonprofit group. And what they do is they look at various sustainability issues, and then they really focus on coming up with solutions. And what they identified is that reducing food waste is the #1 thing that we can all do to reduce climate change. And we'll get into some details later of why that's true, but it's something that we can all do. I'm going to share with you just a list of some terrifying facts, and this should galvanize your interest in this subject. But first, all the world's nearly 1 billion hungry people could be fed on about a quarter of the food that is wasted in the United States, the UK, and Europe. An area larger than China is used to grow food that's never eaten. The average US family wastes over $2,000 on just throwing away food. About 2.3 billion people are expected to join the world by 2050. And this would require about a 60 to 70% increase in global food production. An estimated 30 to 50% of all the food that's wasted is wasted at home. And if food waste were a country, it would be the 3rd largest emitter of greenhouse gas emissions behind the US and China. And you might be asking yourself, well, why is that? How could that be? Well, it's because when food is thrown out in the trash and then it degrades in a landfill, it produces methane. And methane is one of the worst greenhouse gases, and it causes a lot of trouble. So that I just wanted to frame that up, and that's why we're jumping into this. And joining me on this panel today is I've got colleagues from Bimbo and Barilla who are joining me, and I will let Natasha from Bimbo and then Fabio from Barilla introduce themselves. So Natasha, maybe you can just give us a short introduction.
Thanks, Kim, and hello to everybody online. And just wanted to also say thank you to Francesca and that very inspiring talk. Bimbo proudly serves McDonald's in multiple markets, and food waste is part and parcel of sustainability. So this is a great follow-up. I also want to say great to work with Fabio from Barilla, and honored to be part of a company that is taking food waste as seriously as we're one of the world's leading manufacturers for bread and baked goods. Over to you, Fabio.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you. And thank you for allowing me to be part of this important topic, important conversation. I lead the supply chain organization for Barilla America. I've been with the company for 33 years, born and raised in Italy, as you can probably guess from my accent. Proud father of a freshman in college who's studying environmental engineering. And Barilla is a $4 billion company with 29 assets around the world. We are a fourth privately owned generation company with values that include sustainability and the importance of caring about the planet for a very, very long time. The two topics that are the core of the values of Barilla are feeding people with good products and making those products in respect for the environment, which is why our purpose has been summarized several years ago in a statement called good for you, good for the planet. That's what we stand for, and that's our purpose. And we started working on sustainability a long time ago. In 2004, we published our first life cycle assessment for our products. In 2009, we certified those, and we published our first environmental product declaration. Today, 73% of our SKUs are certified. And more recently, we adopted the 17 Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations to drive us towards the same goals that we clearly share and value. And to drive ourselves towards that goal, towards those goals, 10 years ago, 11 years ago, actually, in 2009, we created the Barilla Center for Food and Nutrition. It's a think tank that is supported by the company, but it's mostly formed with scientists and professors and the scientific community that is kind of studying topics like food waste, water usage, recyclability. And those are, studies that we really embrace and value to drive the strategy of the company towards reaching those goals.
Thanks, Fabio. It is just, this is an absolute pleasure to be talking about this with such passionate companies. And just by way of introduction, I work for Morton Salt. I'm the director of environment and sustainability for Morton. And I can talk more about Morton later, but I just really wanted to throw this over to Natasha, and maybe you can just tell us a little bit more about Bimbo, and then I'm going to jump right into some questions that I've got regarding food waste.
Thanks, Kim. And, we talked a little bit earlier with Francesca on what can we do as individuals and consumers, and what can we do as companies? And mending that gap is important. I'm just going to share, growing up, the term I most heard from my parents was waste not, want not. And I still repeat that phrase today because we don't need to take more or make more than we need to, whether we're individuals or companies. But a little bit more about Bimbo. Not quite as historic as Barilla, but we were founded in 1945 in Mexico, when we provided bread wrapped in transparent packaging, allowing for more consumer confidence and food safety. We have grown since then to become over 200 bakeries in over 32 countries around the globe, and we have almost 900 different production lines for baked goods. We were named this year for 5 consecutive years in a row as one of the world's most ethical companies. And for Grupo Bimbo, ethics, it's more than a commitment. And in the words of our chairman and CEO, Daniel Cerviche, it's part of our DNA. And every day we travel this road to fulfill our purpose and motto of nourishing a better world. So very happy to go into the details of addressing food waste today.
Thanks, Natasha, and thanks, Fabio. And I think that really just sets it up, as we know that food is a precious commodity, and we have people all over the planet and even in our city that are struggling, especially as we deal with the pandemic and the financial fallout from that. But I think to really understand what we're talking about, I was wondering, Natasha, if when you think about food waste, what does that really mean? Like, what does that mean at Barilla, food waste? And, just maybe put it in context, and then we'll send it over to Fabio, because I'd like to understand how they're seeing food waste as well.
Sure. We decided to follow the definition of the food FAO. And so we distinguish food losses from food waste, where food losses are the ones that are generated from the field to when the product is ready to ship to your customer, the retailer, while food waste is basically every portion of the food that being ready to be utilized is eventually lost. And we know that, globally, an estimated 14% of food is lost during the part that I was describing in terms of from the field to when it's ready. And the remainder, unfortunately, is lost at retailers during the food service activities, and a good portion is lost at home. So we do that because clearly we can focus and control the part that is within our scope in terms of attacking the food losses within our system. And then it's clearly more challenging to be able to influence and attack the part that is outside of our control, the one that happens, for example, at home. And we're working on that as well. I'm sure that we'll go into that conversation later. But the part that is food loss, really measuring is key, because if you don't know what's happening, you don't know how to improve. So we set in place very specific metrics at all of our plants and in the warehouses to have a good reading of what is lost and what can we do. And we set goals every year in terms of trying to make progress and bring those numbers down. But generally speaking of food waste, I think that the three key words are education, education, education. Because there is so much that can be done, and it's all related to what people know or do not even know in terms of how the food is lost and why they should prevent losing all that food and what can be done. And I agree with what Francesca was saying before about the importance of government support and regulations, because yes, companies can do their role, their part, but without a more meaningful effort that comes from schools to institutions, to the local municipalities, is going to be very, very difficult to win the battle. It has to start from preschool, kindergarten, first grade. Kids need to learn why saving food is important and how to achieve that, and that needs to become really part of their mindset.
Yeah, Fabio, I think that you touched on some really good keys there, is that when, one, we have to understand what food waste is in our company. So if you're, tuning in and you're part of this and you're curious about it, I think that's the first step, is just understanding what you can control and what you can influence. And the education piece is huge. I don't think there are enough conversations about food waste and the impact it has. So, Natasha, when you think about food waste in your company, what does that look like for you?
Yeah, and in complement to what Fabio shared from Barilla, food waste for us, it is any ingredient or product that is not destined for human consumption. And we start with that premise to be that simple. Because of the scale and size of our company, anything that leaves our facilities that is not intended or ready for human consumption is considered waste. So we spend our time prioritizing its reduction, recycling, recovery, and we're extremely ambitious on eliminating waste. Anything on our manufacturing floor, anything on our trucks that would be going to the retail side of the business. If we can't get it to the end consumer, how do we then divert it to a food bank? So it's really critical to be extremely ambitious in those goals and control what you can before that supply chain becomes dispersed.
Absolutely. Because I think that understanding what we're measuring then helps us understand where we can eliminate and reduce. At Morton, we commonly say we feel salty about food waste, and so we make obviously we make various culinary salts, and we're vigilant about improving all kinds of things like our quality and various ways to prevent the waste before it even becomes waste. So we talk about waste prevention internally at Morton, because if our salt is very difficult to find a beneficial reuse for. So that's our primary focus. And so Natasha, at Bimbo, what can you talk about how you go about reducing food waste and preventing food waste at Bimbo?
We can't manage what we don't measure, so it's target setting, and we heard that in the earlier topic as well. And our goal by 2025 is very clear. We want to reduce our food waste by 50% generated in all operations. Our approach is a cross-functional strategy throughout the value chain. Anything that directly or indirectly impacts the generation of waste in our bakeries. And once you set the targets, then there has to be the discipline of the measurement. We have a variety of solutions, to reinforce the sustainability of new processes. There's a particular program that we put in place with an unforgettable acronym. It's WOW, WOW, and it means War on Waste. And it's aptly named because it is a full-out attack on reducing waste wherever we can. You really need that identity and the strength of a program like that and the number of facilities that a company of our size operates in to draw on the accountability and really the focus throughout any aspect of manufacturing. So it's goal setting, having the discipline to measure and to report out. We actually just came out of a quarterly update yesterday where across the company, together with our CEO, we looked at where we were on our journey. And in the in-between, before that next major meeting, we continue to keep it as top of mind. So the measurement is absolutely fundamental.
Thanks, Natasha. I think that it's true. We measure what we treasure. Fabio, at Gorilla, what can you talk about some of the steps that you take to reduce food waste or food loss in your case?
Yes, similar to what Natasha was describing. We set goals at the plants, and the goals for reduction of loss are part of the compensation of the employees. In terms of we try to be realistic in setting a target that can be achievable but challenging, and every year we report progress against reducing the losses, but also reducing, for example, what goes to landfill. Right now, we estimate that the percent of food that goes to landfill in our process is less than 0.3%. So the number is very tiny, but still that needs to go to zero, which is our long-term goal. Long-term meaning in the next 2 or 3 years, we want to have zero landfill. And that is communicated constantly to the people, because the importance of doing this is critical for what I was describing in terms of impact on the environment. But also, for example, what we do, product development is part of the effort. We hear from some of our retail food service customers that they are willing to pay a little bit more for a product that has a better performance, meaning it holds better the cooking, and because of that, they waste less product in the kitchen. So, starting from development of product, you can accomplish the long-term goal of reducing the food waste, not within your operation, but in the next step, in the cooking phase at a restaurant. So they can pre-cook the product, it still holds when they do the final heating up better than most. And that's why it's so important to design with that kind of final goal in mind for the consumer and for whoever is using it at home or in the kitchen of a restaurant.
Fabio, I love that you're talking about that, because I think you're touching on kind of supply chain issues, which is great since we are with Loyola Supply Chain School. So I kind of want to turn the conversation to that area. And Natasha, maybe you can touch on that of, what efforts and, kind of your challenges and wins along reducing food waste along your supply chain.
Continuing along the the program of WOW, WOW, or War on Waste. It's very specific, and there are 5 pillars. So there's not a lot of room for lack of clarity, which is essential in such a program. And the first pillar of this program is laying the foundation and back to the basics. So, when we start up our lines, at the very first step of operations, how are we ensuring that our manufacturing assets are calibrated properly to be able to produce goods in the most efficient way? Then building on those basics, we've adopted a culture and ensuring that the administration throughout all of our operations are making things as easy for people to run our assets as possible. Give the most control to the people running the equipment to reduce error and really maximize our capacity. The third is a committee on waste. So within all of our bakeries, we need to ensure that there's a shared sense of this accountability and that there's communication. We talked about speak up line earlier on a different topic, but it's the same thing. If you see something, say something if something's not working. So speak up. How do we better monitor the performance and remove any obstacles in a very hands-on way? And so these are all a buildup of steps. The next is, how does that process then become systematic and reliable? How do we focus on prevention? And so that our machines are speaking to us and we have maintenance if something does go wrong where we can address it. So, just talking through these things, hopefully, it's giving the sense of just how closely we look at every step of the manufacturing process, again, on the magnitude that we produce with. And the third, once we've tried to make that operate as fine-tunedly as possible, our sales and operation planning. So once we load our product, for distribution, do we have a complete view of the value chain? And how are we best utilizing the many, many routes that we have access to? How do we ensure that our inventories, are proper, not with more than they need or not less, and providing the best service? So this is probably the drill down of the metrics, and where things are not going as well as they need to, we're addressing it. We're very honest with ourselves, not quite where we need to be. And this is consistent through each business unit, wherever we operate in the world. So I know I went a little bit deeper on the manufacturing, but I'm going to give Fabio a chance to answer the same, if that's okay, Kim, so I don't steal all the thunder.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you, Natasha. I mean, the reliability of equipment is the core behind making sure that you don't have sudden stoppages, which would generate that kind of loss that can be, quite significant. So it has to be part of the whole setup of the operation, in terms of making sure that you have good maintenance plans in place, that you have good benchmarking with other plants in terms of learning from others what to do different. We have a global scorecard. All of the factories are part of it. And monthly we review the KPIs, and some of the KPIs in that scorecard include percent of losses, percent of the landfill of the waste that goes to landfill. And we benchmark and kind of challenge ourselves in terms of, okay, that plant did better than that other plant. What did they do different? What can we learn from each other? So that is extremely critical. And then there is the portion related to what you may lose after, in terms of product that is getting close to expiration. Why is that? What can we do? We try to donate it, but sometimes it's too late. And the last thing that we want to see is see product go to landfill. And so we try to fine tune the process of monitoring our inventories, understanding first in, first out, making sure that there is no product lost, and working with the retailers and internally in terms of forecasting and planning processes to make sure that we produce what is needed, that we don't have stuff that gets lost. Most of our products have long shelf life, but in Europe we also operate, bright business stuff that has much shorter shelf life. And in those cases, this kind of activity is even more important.
And I think what you both are touching on here is we have so many things that we have to try to control and manage, between the proper calibration of machines down to managing these relationships with our suppliers. And, and I think what this all speaks to, and Natasha, you touched on it a little bit with Bimbo's WOW program, is I think it really boils down to having a culture around sustainability and getting your employees to buy in, because I think what we're hearing here is that it takes a lot of people to manage this, to really get after these, any sustainability goal, but the food waste in particular. And at Morton, one of the things we've done internally to help build this culture and build support are a couple things. One, we established green teams, not only at our plants, but also at our corporate offices, because we have to set the example. If we're not rolling up our sleeves right alongside everybody working at the plant, then it sends the wrong message. So before COVID, we implemented a composting program in our corporate office so that we could make sure that all the lunch scraps and any food waste is being composted versus going into the trash. And we worked with our building management to get that approved, and we do composting at all of our corporate offices, and then at a few of our locations they've put in community gardens, and that also helps build this. It builds the culture of sustainability, like, so that employees can use the garden. They go there with their families. Each employee has a row, and they compost all of their lunch scraps and use it for the garden. So there's always passionate people around. And we also started a program called Do More Good. It's a simple message, but it's powerful because we're doing more good in our communities. We're doing more good for each other, and we're doing more good for the planet. So it's just this idea that we can always do something better. And I'm curious if there's other techniques that either Natasha or Fabio, either one of you, can answer this, but is there things that you're doing to build that culture of sustainability and to help educate our own employees about what we're up to in terms of food waste and other issues?
I can go first. The program that we have in place with our employees here in US is called Teaching Kitchen, and we try to teach our employees how to put together a meal that is nutritious, that is balanced, but it's also the right portion. We know that one of the main challenges in food waste is how much food that people cook, and sometimes they keep it for the day after, and we do that as well. If you go on our website, you will find recipes that are designed to use leftover from the previous time you cook pasta. So you can go there and find a recipe that will allow you to put together a good meal from a leftover. But we know that most of the times people toss the product that they don't end up eating. So it's important to educate about the quantity, but it's also important to educate about how to create recipes that are nutritious, that allow you, for example, to use something that is almost becoming leftover. Like if you have produce in your fridge that is expiring, find a recipe that allows you to do something that is still nutritious and then can eventually then be frozen, like a soup, like use your greens to make a pesto and use that pesto for your pasta instead of a different type of sauce. So that is a sort of a motivating way of engaging the employees in this idea of everybody can contribute a little bit every day in what they do when they go buy their grocery, their food, and then when they use it at home, buy the right quantity, don't buy too much. I do sometimes that mistake myself, because we used to be 3, now we're 2 because our son is in college, and I always say, okay, there is too much stuff in the fridge. Next time I need to remember that we're just 2 now. But I rarely throw away stuff because I use what I was saying. If I see that some produce is so and so, I make a soup, and that's a good meal for the next dinner.
Yeah.
So it's
yeah,
simple. It's simple,
love that.
but I mean, I grew up similar to what Natasha was saying. I wouldn't leave food in my plate because my mom would tell me there are kids that are dying and would be happy to eat what you are leaving in your plate. You shouldn't do that. Don't take too much and eat what you need.
Yes.
So
Yes. No,
I still remind that it's probably part of our kind of culture in terms of
it is.
when you
It
grow
is.
with that kind of mindset and you put it in place, you try to kind of convey the same kind of message to other people to try to do the same. So it's really education that we also bring outside. This program that I was describing called the Teaching Kitchen is something that we bring to events, that we bring to schools, that we bring to places where we also do that we support in terms of charity, either donating food or donating money, and we also try to explain to them what this is about and how to go for reduction of food waste.
And I love, Fabio, that you're talking about this because, I think that that concept of not throwing out food, that was really drilled down into me too. I was brought up in a mobile home court, and everybody I knew was poor. We were poor. Nobody had money. I remember going with my mother and, going to the food bank, and we would get the giant thing of oatmeal, a giant thing of cheese, and a giant thing of beans and some peanut butter. And like that would sometimes that's what we would eat. She'd make oatmeal and a peanut butter sandwich. And so this idea of like wasting food, it's a funny phenomena that I think I see now with like some of the younger generation than me, they take pictures of their food and then post it on social media, and then I don't think that half of it gets eaten. So it's a really funny thing that we're doing. But so I think we're talking about now how we influence outside of our span of control. So there's things that we're doing inside our companies, managing our supply chain, managing those relationships, making sure that we're empowering people and creating this culture. But there's a bigger responsibility out there. I know, like for Morton, the reason why we got into this and we call it erase food waste is really because we know that salt is used in an ingredient in so many different foods, and so we really thought we had to get involved, and we wanted to do it in a playful way that brings joy to the consumers. And so we engage on social media. You can find us on Instagram and Facebook, and we bring in guest chefs, and they'll do a battle of how to use leftovers, or they'll teach you how to make certain things and how to like sneak in different little leftovers into a main dish. And they're so much fun. They know so much, and they're really fun to watch. And so you can tune in. And the other thing I wanted to tell everybody, Natasha, Fabio, and I put together a document, and it's some tips and tricks for reducing food waste at home and at work. And I think one of our folks from Loyola will put that link in the chat, so you can also find it on LinkedIn. If you find me on LinkedIn, I posted it there as well. So a couple different places you can find it. Really simple things you can do. And the greatest thing about it, and we'll move into questions soon, but the greatest thing I think about this is that this is something you can do at home. You don't have to put solar panels on your house. You don't have to buy an electric car. You don't have to commit to getting rid of all the plastic out of your life. If you just are a better steward of food waste, like you yourself, like this is the hardest part about this conversation, but we all have to take personal responsibility for what we're doing. And now that we know better, we can do better. We can not buy so much. The grocery store is a tricky place. It's designed to look like the land of plenty, and that triggers something in our brain that just makes us want to just buy it. So, you know, there's some things we can do. We can make a list and then stick to it. And before we turn over to questions, Natasha, I just wanted to give you a chance to chime in here on maybe some things that Bimbo's doing to help influence outside your specific span of control.
No, thanks, Kim, for the question. And, you know, as we've been saying, as manufacturers, we do our utmost and we remain very ambitious and focused. But there's a responsibility, a social responsibility to go beyond. And so we actually implement over 200 different good neighbor and hunger relief support projects throughout our markets. We have alliances with organizations as big as Feeding America here in the US, a host of many other local food banks. We work with an organization called Sin Desperdicios, which is focused on markets in Latin America. And, you know, with this pandemic, and again, I think we mentioned it in the earlier session, the inequalities and food waste have never been more magnified than they have during COVID. So you're sharing your personal, very touching story. I mean, that is reality for many, many families today. When you think that we would have, you know, the stores, you know, lined from top to bottom in terms of access to products, but that's not everybody's reality. So I think we feel a deep sense of responsibility on a corporate level to partner with food banks to get as much product that's safe to eat in the hands of as many people as possible. And sometimes some of the most easy steps are those that are most successful. We run an annual race. It's called our Global Energy Race. And even with COVID, we did it remotely. So there was a chance for every registrant to donate bread to Feeding America. And with the number of people that signed up, we ended up donating 1.5 million slices of bread to food banks. It's just as a simple step like that. So, you know, I would say as, you know, associates, we have a role not to just wait for opportunities to come, but to ask questions. You know, what are the food banks in our area? How can we become more aware and involved in doing these simple steps? Because, you know, when somebody is hungry or suffering, it's hard to be at rest, right? In a world that seems so plentiful.
Yes, similar at Barilla. I mean, we want to be, I mean, good citizens where in the communities where we operate. Last year, for example, only in US, we supported over 50 different organizations, and we try to prioritize those that have also an education component in what they do. For example, in Chicago, we've been supporting the Urban Growers Collective since they started in 2015. They teach people that they employ how to farm. They grow their produce and then they sell it locally with buses that go in food deserts where it's difficult to find fresh produce in the store. And in New York, we support Harlem Grown, that is basically a similar organization. They start with kids, so they teach kids the importance of how to grow your produce and eat a good product, and then they produce and sell it. And in Los Angeles, we've been supporting Katerina's Club. It's a chef that is running this program, has been running this program that is basically feeding kids that would otherwise go to bed hungry. Earlier this year, they celebrated 6 million meals served to kids in need. And most of the pasta that Bruno is using is our product. We give mostly donations more than product to Jose Andres and his World Central Kitchen. And they, as you know, I mean, support catastrophes. They support every event where there is need for someone to be there and feed people, like the hurricanes, like Puerto Rico. And in Italy, we just recently pledged to donate 1 million meals to the program that Massimo Bottura is running. His Food for Soul project is very inspirational. So we're part of it, providing some of the food that he's serving to people in his refectorios, which is a similar concept of feeding people that wouldn't be able to go to bed not being hungry otherwise. So this is very important for us because, as we said, I mean, taking care of those that are in need is part of what we are and what we want to do.
Yeah, I think what you both are talking about is really aligning your company's mission in a real way, through donations and partnerships with food banks. And I'm wondering, maybe some of our questions that we're getting are, people are curious about what conversations are you having with suppliers regarding food waste, and what are some, is, if you could only ask suppliers a couple questions to get them thinking about this, or if somebody was just starting out, what advice would you give them, Natasha?
Yeah, so specific to bread, innovation is going to be fundamental to continuing to address food insecurity. Innovation from the very basic, from the raw material, from how we harvest grain and wheat. There was a major innovation done, I think it's over 50 years ago, in Mexico by a gentleman who was able to have the wheat withstand strong winds, and it became more resilient. And all of a sudden, billions were fed as a result. So we have to really keep our innovation hat on in terms of things very, very upstream that are going to give us the powerful downstream effects. So we can do it. We're more innovative than ever. But we need to be thinking of it at the design and product development level. And Fabio, you touched upon that earlier.
That's really great, Natasha. Fabio, we got a question in around, how do companies, or are any of our companies working to influence regulations such as labeling, and are we working that angle at all? So I'm curious, Fabio, if Gorilla is doing any work on that level.
I would say more in Europe, where we have a more significant presence than in US. In US, we're still a fairly small company, so our ability to influence institution is fairly limited. We don't have, for example, a lobbying activity. In Europe, we've done more work with the European community in terms of, we started our Farm to Fork program 12 years ago. The United Nations adopted it summer of last year. Is one of the pillars of the strategy of the European community to fight food waste, and also to work on environmental improvements. So that is where we've been able to work with the authorities and be part of the development. For example, right now, is more related to environment than food waste, but we are part of a program with the nine different companies in the European community that is subsidizing a program where we are going to be able to generate electricity from sun through the concentration of the sun heating mirrors that then eats up ceramic particles, and you get basically free electricity out of the program. That is a significant development in terms of technology that we're partnering with the European community in the field of the sustainability. With the private.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say clearly with the suppliers, with the partners where we try to do development. One of the initiatives we are in place right now, for example, because our milling process generates a significant amount of bran that you cannot use in making your pasta unless it's all grain. We are trying to develop a way to convert that bran into a fully biodegradable packaging. We would like to replace our plastic, which is already recyclable, but we want that material to become compostable. And it's work in progress. We haven't gotten there yet, but if I look at the examples, I was reading recently of an Italian company called Orange Fiber. They make an alternative silk that is currently used in clothes that you can buy, for example, at H&M. There is a line of product at H&M that is made with this alternate silk made of orange peel. So the byproduct of making orange juice turns into fabric. There is another amazing company called Anam. They produce this alternative leather called Piñatex. It's made from the leaves of the pineapples. The product is sourced in the Philippines. Instead of basically tossing the leaves, the long fibers are converted into the basic for a new fabric that is similar to leather. And that's also clothes that you can find at H&M as part of their offering. So ideas like that, you would never think that something like an orange peel would turn into a cloth that you can wear. But that's what we're trying to kind of develop in terms of partnership, to be very, very creative in the circular economy concept of not wasting anything. It's true that our brand goes to animal feed, it doesn't go to landfill, but still you want to find a more interesting way of using your losses.
Yeah, and I am so glad that you turned the conversation to a global conversation, because that's really what it is. I know that there's a lot of companies that are on a global scale. If you're not at a company at a global scale, I think this is still a very good point that we're touching on, because I think it shows the difference between where you are in the world can have a huge effect on your level of influence. In Europe and in other countries, it's a much more collaborative relationship, even between the manufacturing and the regulators. And in Canada, it's like that too. It's a more collaborative process. In the United States, it's adversarial. Most of us know that if we're getting an inspector on site, you never really know which way it's going to go. You're guilty until you prove yourself innocent. It's a much different dynamic, and so and you have to work with lobbyists to really influence regulations. So I think it's a good thing to keep in mind. And you also, Fabio, touched on this idea of circular economy, and sometimes it's also referred to as beneficial reuse for waste products. And so, Natasha, I'm going to flip it over to you and see if you want to chime in on this topic at all.
I actually just wrote down the names of those two companies, Fabio. So I'm going to check out H&M's Orange Silk.
There is a third one that I found very interesting. Is called the Toast Beer, and it's probably interesting for you because they make beer out of bread, leftover of sliced bread when it's no longer fresh enough. They convert that into beer, and 100% of their revenues is given as donations. So it's a very noble cause that they basically work for. It's a very recent company based in the UK. They ship a beer to your home if you want to. It's a little probably pricier than normal, but what they do is amazing.
Kim, I would just say, just to maybe conclude and not keep us from Q&A is, we are focused to improve our products as far upstream as possible and how we design, how we reduce waste in manufacturing and sizes and packaging, and then how we address working with alliances, once it's on the distribution path and close to the store. But I think, the constant awareness is probably our most successful day in, day out tool. And you said, maybe not everybody's global, but there's still something that, global companies talking with smaller companies and smaller vice versa, that we can all learn from. This problem is so much bigger than one organization or one meeting, right? We'll probably have emails, after we hang up, and we'll see some other activity. Wednesday was Stop Food Loss, Day. We've got every possible ability in today's world to have a raised awareness and to take some action on it. So we try to use our global scale to take the best practices and influence those operations that might be smaller. And maybe there's something coming out of Chile, for example, that can have very powerful, positive implications in a much larger market. So I think that's something for smaller companies to keep in mind, that you can do something every single day, and awareness is such a key aspect to to feeling in control.
Yeah, Natasha, I think those are such excellent points. I really believe that there's power in coming together. I know at Morton, one of the things we started to do was this idea of coffee and a problem. So we bring our environmental people together from all over the company, and we discuss some challenge that somebody's facing, and we just wanted to take the stigma out of that, of this idea that everybody has to be perfect and everybody has to have all the answers. And I really applaud Loyola. I was talking with Harry Haney. We were just introduced, and him and I started talking, and I told him this idea, this coffee and a problem idea, and Harry just, he latched onto it, and he was like, yes, you know what, I love that. We can do something here at Loyola to support that. And so what Harry and his team have done is they've allowed us to form a working group on food waste, which Natasha, Fabio, and I are all a part of. And if that's something that you're interested in and you want to be a part of it, that would be wonderful. Just put in, I think that we'll have a little form at the end of the session. And so if you're interested in that, that would be wonderful. We're going to, and we have another, we have two task forces. So we have the one on food waste, and then we have another one forming for just discussing these bigger issues around sustainability. You can even tell from these two sessions so far today that it's a really big topic. There's we're trying to make the earth greener, but in doing that, we've got to work through all these areas of gray. And so that's what these task forces are all about, is how do we really break down these topics, these challenges, and then how do we implement the solutions in our company? Like what, because it's hard work. I mean, it's fairly easy to understand that the larger picture and these larger ideas, but when you really get down to brass tacks and you're struggling with competing priorities, and maybe you've got management that isn't as aware as they could be. So this is the power of Loyola, and that Loyola is also very passionate about this. They're allowing us to come together and talk about these things as a professional working group, and it's a wonderful opportunity. So if that's something that interests you, please fill out the little form that's going to be coming your way. And if it's if it's not the right time, that's totally understandable. We've got a lot going on between the pandemic and everything else. So anyway, I think this is probably a good place to wrap up. And I really appreciate Natasha and Fabio for your time today, and for all of our Loyola team that has been supporting us behind the scenes here today. Like, they just doing a fabulous job. So thanks everybody for your time.
Thanks, Kim.
Thank you very much, Kim and Natasha and Fabio, for some just terrific information on both what we can do as individuals and as our organizations to make a difference in this incredible environmental and frankly moral imperative that we have with food waste. We're going to take a break right now for just about 5 or 6 minutes, and we're going to come back at 11 o'clock with our third panel, and you won't want to miss it. We've got a great group coming up from GreenBiz and AT&T, Tyson Foods, and Salesforce. They're going to talk about a culture of sustainability in embedding a culture of sustainability in your organization. So we'll be back at 11 a.m. Thank you.